It's very humbling to be here, the first Foreign Secretary in 14 years to visit, to stand with the Syrian people as they rebuild this country. Many Brits will have been moved to tears watching Syrians take to the streets to celebrate their freedom after the fall of Assad. Syria matters hugely to the UK. It matters that it's stable, because if it's not, the terrorism that can happen here washes up on our own streets back at home. And it matters also because of irregular migrations. It's hugely important that we continue to support progress here. This is a country that is ancient, made up of many different people. The future has to be an inclusive one, it has to be a peaceful one, and I hope for prosperity for all of the Syrian people.
كرامتنا بدنا كرامه بدنا عمل وامان وترجع ليسا وعلي ولي الله وعلي ولي الله وعلي ولي الله وعلي ولي الله لا اله الا الله لا اله الا الله محمد رسول الله وعلي ولي الله وعلي ولي الله اوقف الخطر اوقف الخطر اوقف القتل اوقف القتل.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming with our special friend and guest, Patrick Henningsen. Patrick, how are you doing, my friend? And I didn't know that in the UK, you guys are appointing actors in the cabinet, like David Lammy. He almost brought tears to my eyes with the background music and all the montage that they have done in this ridiculous video talking about the freedom they have brought to the Syrian people.
That was the ultimate propaganda montage. I mean, they literally didn't leave anything out. Even the white helmet's got a cameo in that one. I mean, every single thing he said is just so much the opposite, the inverse of the real situation. It just goes to show you Kevork maintaining these narratives. Even after they've achieved regime change, they're still determined to make sure they nail these narratives down tight going forward, even if they just don't correspond to reality at all.
Indeed. Guys, most of you know Patrick Henningsen and know that he is the editor of the 21st Century Wire, but some of you may not know that Patrick launched his own Substack. So the link is scrolling on the screen, patrickhenningsen.substack.com. Also, the link is in the description below, and he will also publish his commentaries and analysis. And the other day, he was also on RT International discussing this particular issue, which I watched, and I found it really fascinating. Today, I tagged him on my Substack, guys. So you can also, if you go to Substack and read the last article, in the article I'm quoting Patrick, you can just click on it and you can also access to his Substack. Patrick, the UK, in my opinion, is the script of, let's say, of supporting some of these radical Islamist, Takfiri groups in the region, especially in the Middle East and North Africa, started from the British Empire. And this was in the mid-20s. Please correct me if I'm wrong, when the Brits used to occupy Egypt and called it a mandate, of course, and they received some backlash, resistance back then. And those who were resisting the UK occupation were the nationalists and the socialists. So the Brits went into business. How do we divide and conquer this society? So let's find a natural foe for the resistance back then. And this was basically the emergence of the Muslim Brotherhood organization, which is naturally anti-nationalist and anti-socialist, anti-communist group. So they started fighting against each other instead of fighting against the occupier back then. Long story short, today we can see that these examples were copied many, many times, not only in Egypt, but different regions, including in the former Yugoslavia. Today we're going, of course, to discuss that. But is it correct from my side to assume that the reason the UK helped in the emergence of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is accused of being the source of these Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Nusra groups in the region, was only to find a rift in the Egyptian society so that they could turn against each other and find the foe in the Egyptian society?
Yes, I think so. I think you sort of summed that up pretty well. I find this to be a very interesting subject because not just historically how the Muslim Brotherhood came together and where it's positioned itself throughout the Islamic world and in the West as well, but how it's changed and how it's being used, how it has been used as a tool and how it's still being used as a tool by Western governments of a kind of a fifth column and a tool of destabilization. And so internationally, out in the Islamic world, in the region, the Muslim Brotherhood serves as that imperial tool as well. And it's kind of a cat's paw, as it were, for Anglo-American and Israeli too, destabilization and to attack or to threaten regimes, to discipline Gulf states. Saudi Arabia comes to mind. And then domestically, the West used the Muslim Brotherhood in each Western country domestically as a political foil. And so they'll pit it against the far right. They do this in America all the time. You see all the Zionists in America, the Muslim Brotherhood and Obama and all this sort of thing. And they use it to gin up the far right. And then the Muslim Brotherhood will say to the moderates, or their pitch will be, it's either us or Al-Qaeda. It's either us or ISIS. We are the middle road there. And then they'll also say internationally, it's either us or the communists. We'd rather work with us than the trade unionists or the socialists. So it serves different. It's actually the cell structure of the Muslim Brotherhood, whether that's in Syria, Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, Tunisia, France, the UK, the United States. It'll cater. It's very fluid and relative. It'll cater to wherever it's being hosted in a different way. And there's a spectrum. You'll have more extremist membership, you've got sympathizers, and you've got gray actors as well in all of these different cells, you see. So it's a spectrum, and I've seen them in America. I've seen them operating in the United States. It's very interesting. They'll operate in the kind of Arab American oblasts, if you will, concentrations of Arab communities there. Probably, Dearborn, Michigan, Los Angeles, Tampa, Florida, etc. You'll find them there. And their allegiance or loyalty or membership, they'll express to varying degrees, depending on what the political climate is. But the point is, it's a fifth column that can be deployed. And Syria was, I think, the main project. Not to make it all about Syria, but the toppling of Syria, it was a long, long project for the U.S. and Israel. It's a very hard nut to crack, Syria. And you can see that from the Hama uprising in the 1980s. And so that was put down by Hafiz al-Assad. But the people who left the country, the members of Akhwan, or they call them in Arabic, Akhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, were airlifted to the United States, living around the Beltway in Washington, D.C., relocated to other places, and then their children are loyal to the cause of regime change to overthrow the Assad regime. In the UK, you also have, they perform a role there, again, used as a kind of a foil domestically, but British intelligence and certain members of the media who work for the Qatari media like people who write for Middle East Eye, very pro-Muslim Brotherhood, you see. So Qatar, so the West used the Muslim Brotherhood, the support for Qatar, and the Qataris used that to antagonize the Saudis as well. This is how you can use a tool like this to keep everybody on their toes in the region. And then when Morsi was, elected president in 2012 and was only in power for a year, the counter-revolution was organized and funded by the Saudis and the Emiratis. And they had boiler rooms of bloggers working, all of the printing houses in Dubai, creating English language banners, shipping those into Cairo. It was a big show. It was a big show. And it's really a big operation. And that hasn't really been publicized so much. You see bits of it written about. And Lindsey Graham and John McCain were flying over to try to demand the release of Morsi. I don't know how much of that was theater or there was a genuine schism going on. But the point is, think of it like a dial. It's a dial you can turn up and you can turn it down. And then you use them like the U.S. used the Kurds. They turn the dial up and then they turn it down and they sideline them. And they'll always be there. They'll always, because there's always people looking for a platform, looking for an opportunity for whatever. And Syria was the ultimate. It was a socialist, state-driven, state-directed economy that had a secular government. So it was the perfect cause for the Muslim Brotherhood. And then you had the Hama legacy that they used constantly to gin up hate for the Syrian government and for Assad and so forth. And also, let's not just, the last thing, it is a Sunni-based movement. So what's the main competition for this in the region? Well, it's Hezbollah. It's Ansar Allah, the Houthis. It's the Iranian Revolution. Now you can see how things are lining up. That you can't have political Islam unless it's Sunni, because that's the lane that the British, the Israelis, and the Americans traditionally control.
Indeed.
So,
indeed. In this case, by the way, guys, yesterday I posted a photo of Julani on YouTube as a YouTube post, and YouTube deleted the post saying that I'm glorifying terrorism, which is I was doing exactly the opposite. And because of that, I received a strike and I appealed against the strike. Unfortunately, the strike will stay for 40 days until they look into it. And during the strike, they suppress these streams so much that it could reach to 20 or maximum 30% to the usual reach. So if you're watching this, I would really appreciate it if you just thumbs up, hit the like button while you're watching, because that could really be helpful to navigate through this so-called strike. Patrick, there is also something that is that happened historically, and this was in the 50s, in the rise of the Pan-Arabists, and this was the trend when Egypt, Syria, and Palestine, and in different regions in the Middle East, or MENA region, let's say, they have witnessed this Pan-Arabist awakening, trying to bring these countries together geographically. They failed miserably because they were hyper-focused on geographical, let's say, unity rather than economic integration, which could lead later into, let's say, some viable confederation or federalism among these Arabic countries. However, during this time, the Muslim Brotherhood was again against the Pan-Arabists. For example, in Egypt in the 50s against Jamal Abdel Nasser, which is one of the very important figures in the Arab world back then, and still is, because after him, I believe only Nasrallah and Hafez were somehow able to fill his shoes. But back then in Egypt in the 50s, the United States didn't join the Muslim Brotherhood type of groups against Nasser. They were on the opposite side of the UK in this case, especially when the UK, Israel, and France bombed, let's say, Egypt. What was the main, let's say, disagreement between the US and UK that they were not really together in this case against Pan-Arabist Nasser?
I don't know the reason per se, other than that was an anomaly based on, compared to what we see now, that when the uniform support of Israel. So I believe Eisenhower was the president at that time during the Suez crisis. Yes. So I think and let's be clear what happened there. Okay, the big news of the Suez crisis was the moment that the region switched hands from being mainly under British control, British dominance, to United States dominance of the region of the Middle East. That was the point. So maybe it had something to do with, you know, wrestling control of maritime trade routes going in through the post-World War period, and probably a heavy dose of Cold War strategic positioning. Now, and here's the important point, okay, with the United States. During the Cold War, the biggest threat for the U.S., and especially as the Israeli lobby was beginning to gain traction and influence in the mid-50s into the 60s, the big threat was not communism per se in the region, but Arab nationalism. Secular Arab nationalism was a big threat. And certainly Israel regarded that as the number one threat, and the United States as well, because with Arab nationalism, some of these countries were leaning towards state-directed economic and state-owned industries, utilities, the main things. And so, and they saw that, but it was really Arab nationalism, this fear, the British and the Americans, of Arabs uniting under secular governments, but uniting under an Arab nationalist identity. Instead, they promoted the pan-Islamist version, which was dead on arrival anyway. A lot of it is just kind of, that's the Muslim Brotherhood line. So again, a useful tool to help to deploy to break up the emergence of Arab nationalism.
Indeed. I'm going a little bit into history, Patrick, because I want to walk through these events, these examples, also for the people today in 2025 to understand that this is not something like happened today. Like, there is a deep history behind these Islamist groups and who supported them and why they supported them. And one of the examples that always strikes me is after the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur War, Syria and Egypt attacked Israel to liberate the territories Israel occupied in the 67 war. And back then, during the mid of the war, Anwar Sadat stopped the war on his side in the Sinai, and he called for diplomacy and negotiations with the American side. So peace in exchange for the territory, that was the formula. And he struck a deal with Israel in 1978, what was the name? The Camp David Accords.
Camp David Accords.
Camp David Accords. But during this time, the U.S. was trying to convince Hafez al-Assad to join these so-called peace negotiations, and Hafez was very against it. And once Sadat signed the deal in 78, in 79, the Muslim Brotherhood rebellion starts in Syria. Like, the timing is also, those are indications, don't you think? Like, while they want to press Hafez to join these talks, an uprising which turns into a rebellion starts in Syria. And many people may not know they have formed an Islamic emirate in Hama. They have declared it an Islamic state, like in Hama and in Aleppo. And guys, the same exaggerations that you hear nowadays after the 2011 about the insurgency against Assad, back then it was similar, but the scope was limited because we didn't have social media, all these NGOs and human rights organizations. Now, if you ask any Julani supporter, pick anyone, tell him how many people were killed by the Assad government or the Syrian army in the 80s in this rebellion, they would start with 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. And now after the ouster of Assad, it's 60,000. They say 60,000. And then I read a document for the CIA. They had assets in Hama. They estimate the number of the casualties, 5,000. 1/3 of them were from Syrian army soldiers, and 1/3 from the Muslim Brotherhood fighters, and 1/3 civilians. This is exactly the same rate of the Syrian regime change war after 2011. Around 500,000 people perished. 1/3 are Syrian soldiers, 1/3 are the terrorists, FSA, ISIS, Nusra, and 1/3 civilians from all around Syria, including in areas under the control of the Syrian government, which means the attack was coming from the opposition side or the Julani and the ISIS side. So all these exaggerations happen in front of our eyes, but going back to history, it helps for the people to understand these coincidences that the Muslim Brotherhood back then, and Muslim Brotherhood was also supported by Saddam. And at the beginning, Saddam was also a CIA asset when he came to power. So if we connect these issues together, I truly believe, and I agree with you, that the Muslim Brotherhood has been a fifth column in the Arabic world. And this was the, as we say, the spawn of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS and Nusra, which they put it into business in Afghanistan. Afghanistan, I think it was the major war which they have tested this formula, and it was really successful against the Soviet Union.
Yeah, yeah. The Muslim Brotherhood, the roots of I think the cleric named El Afghani, I think, before Hassan al-Banna was Afghani. So the roots go all the way to Afghanistan. But Anwar Sadat, I remember as a child watching that on TV, Camp David with Sadat and Menachem Begin. Jimmy Carter was president. And immediately after that peace summit or that peace accord, then the assassination of Sadat, allegedly by the Muslim Brotherhood, supposedly. And looking back at that now, I think who benefited from that? Well, certainly, you know, peace between Egypt, and anytime there's been any kind of peaceful overture, even though Menachem Begin is a former terrorist, put that aside for the moment, the hard right in Israel and the extremist Israeli elements have always intervened to put Israel back on the right track, which is permanent state of war with everybody. Remember Benjamin Netanyahu, you know, publicly, you know, campaigning to have Rabin, you know, dealt with for the crime of attempting to make peace with the Palestinians during the long Oslo process. But so that's an important part. The other part is when we look back at the formation of these networks, because that's one of the things the Muslim Brotherhood is a network. Another network that it was in competition with was the PLO. The PLO had an international network, secular in nature, not Islamist, secular, all around the world. And it was aligned with the trade unionists. It was aligned with all of these different, the non-aligned movement and so forth. Very, very well-developed international political, economic network as well. So that's one. The other timing, when you're talking about the timing, is at this time, the offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the offshoots was Hamas. But this was an offshoot that was steered and in a way indirectly birthed by Shin Bet in 1982. And certainly through funding and influence, one could steer and also infiltrate. And maybe it took Hamas 30 years to, you know, clean out the infiltration over those years, and it was a very violent process.
Or maybe not completely, Patrick.
Or maybe not completely. So then Saddam, using the Muslim Brotherhood with Saddam at the time, then Saddam's declaring war on Iran, and this is also the time when Hezbollah was forming in the early 1983, and the Iran-Iraq War at this time. So this was the nexus there, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and all of these things converging historically, the early 80s. And so much of what we have today stems from that period, those few years. But you can see the schisms. The schisms are clear. Because the Americans and the Israelis and the British are the masters at ethnography and divide and rule. They view sectarian division as a strategic asset in the region. Make no mistake about it, even till today. And that will never change. That's not going to change. Only through brute force and who knows, but they'll never give that up. Although some of those schisms, look at Lebanon, for example. You know, they're trying to stir up a war in Lebanon with Julani. The Americans, the Israelis are attempting to do everything imaginable to start a civil war, a sectarian war in Lebanon. The only saving grace for Lebanon is that they remember what it was like. That, you know, they still remember what the civil war was like, and will try to avoid it at all costs. But the pressure is on. The external pressure is greater than ever. So it's They want a repeat
Yep.
of history.
You mentioned Hamas, and I'm no fan of Hamas. I've been, in the past 14 years when I was like criticizing them, and many people didn't like that. Of course, I had my own reasons because of what happened in Syria, but I have my own opinion again about Hamas and October 7 and what followed of October 7. And I think it's not the right time to speak about it because while the Palestinian people are being killed en masse at the current moment, being shot like it's a sport, right? You can't really come and start talking and criticizing or attacking now whoever is in charge of Gaza Strip before the suffering of the Palestinians is over. So I will save that for later, but I have a really strong opinion about Hamas, which I will keep it for myself for the moment. One of our friends says, what does capitalists have to do with it? I would say, the Muslim Brotherhood is the most capitalist political party you could ever find in the Arab world, like more than the liberals. They are for complete open markets, and they are, for example, see what they're doing nowadays in Syria in terms of selling out the infrastructure, the carbohydrates, the ports, the schools, the universities, the airports, everything, energy, for corporations. They don't really, they're not really building a national economy. They are basically bringing foreign investors to build the country for them. And that's, in my opinion, a suicide formula for any country who would like to keep the minimum of its sovereignty so that they could make some decisions for themselves. Now, these corporations will govern and control Syria. And that's why you see all this talk now, guys, to remove Al-Qaeda from the terrorist list. And today, by the way, guys, just for your information, this is a letter published by the US Foreign Secretary, right? This is the Department of State. So while you guys, we are busy chasing the Epstein client list, here is what you missed. The Trump administration revoked the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation from HTS, aka Al-Nusra Front, aka Al-Qaeda's branch in Syria. And if you check the document, the first sentence, it says revocation of the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation of Al-Nusra Front. So they still consider it Al-Nusra Front. They say aka, or also known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So in the eyes of the US, whoever is in charge of the US at the current moment, they still see Julani as Al-Nusra, as Al-Qaeda branch. Like usually in the media, they say Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, previously known as Al-Nusra Front, formerly known as the Al-Qaeda branch. No, the US Department says clearly this is Al-Nusra Front, which means this is the Al-Qaeda, and now they're revoking this designation from, and I'm not shocked at all, of course, about it.
That's just, yeah. I mean, it's an admission that at all this time that the terrorist seized control of Damascus, of the capital of Syria. A terrorist that, let's be very clear, that the United States was arming, was backing all of the NATO countries, Turkey, led by Turkey, for France, everybody, the UK, everybody. Jordan was working with these people, providing a staging ground. And they'll say, no, it was the Free Syrian Army. Mm-hmm. No, the train and equip program, those groups were fluid in membership. That's been proven, including ISIS. So they can't sort of dance around the issue, but that means that there's an illegitimate junta in power in Damascus that's a terrorist, and all of his cabinet are fellow travelers. These are all criminals. These are people that supposedly the entire war on terror post 9/11 is based on somehow, containing and eliminating these types of people. At least that was the party line by the U.S. and Britain and the West, but that, and the Gulf too, who were supposedly working with them in the war on terror. Now you can see what a ridiculous farce that all is. They've just basically abandoned the whole narrative now by legitimizing, normalizing relations with Julani, aka al-Sharar. It's just ridiculous. I mean, this guy is a head chopper that even Donald Trump admitted he was lording over 30,000 terrorists in Idlib when during Trump's first term. He said that 30,000. Trump said 30,000 terrorists in Idlib, headed by Julani. And all of a sudden, oh, he's a good-looking man.
Tough guy. Tough past.
Very strong past. Very strong past. What the hell does that mean? Very strong past. He's a head chopper. So how can you do this with a straight face? But it just shows what a ridiculous farce the whole thing always was. It always was. And this gets to the point. This whole idea of designating, or what the British have a lovely word called proscribing, proscribing organizations. Proscribe, it sounds very routine. They've just proscribed a domestic activist, grassroots activist group called Palestine Action, have been proscribed as terrorists for doing what, Just Stop Oil and all these climate.
Can we tell us, Patrick, what does this Palestine Action do in the UK? To be honest, I haven't followed their actions. Like, what do they do physically or verbally? What is their purpose?
What I can gather just by looking at what they've done over the last couple of years is they go after arms manufacturers, namely Israeli-linked ones like Elbit Systems, which is an Israeli owned Israeli company based in the UK, shipping weapons to Israel during the genocide. So they've taken it upon themselves to try to stop the export of arms from these companies, and they're using what's called direct action to do that. And apparently they spray painted a couple of British planes with red paint, and supposedly, disabled one of them a little bit, who knows. But that was recently at one of the RAF bases. So that was like a bridge too far for the government. But the Israeli lobby has been pressuring the government, and Israeli NGOs are pressuring the government to designate this as a domestic terror organization, even though they've been vindicated in multiple court decisions recently, basically where the judge says, look, they're trying to stop a genocide. They believe they're acting in their in their conscience, and therefore we have to let them release them. So even though they've won in court 3 or 4 times, the government has still gone after them, and basically now you can't even express support for them publicly, brandish their logos, make a tweet in support of them, or whatever. You will be arrested under the 2000 Terrorism Act. So think about, let's compare that to the foreign secretary going to Damascus, meeting with a cold-blooded, head-chopping, proper terrorist, the former deputy of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi of ISIS, the founder of al-Qaeda in Syria, rebranded to al-Nusra and Hayatir al-Sham, okay? That is Mohammed al-Julani, who then changed his name to become more respectable, wearing a Savile Row suit, to Ahmed al-Sharar. Suddenly he's legit. Saudi-born, of course. Supposedly he's Syrian, but, Saudi-born, whatever that means. What's interesting is Tony Blair's chief of staff, his name was Jonathan Powell.
Yeah.
And he's very active on the Syria thing even after Blair left government. He was with, I believe, what I would call a regime change consultancy called, I think the name of it is Intermediate. And so, and basically part of their job was giving a rebrand to al-Julani, and even Robert Ford, the former American ambassador to Syria. Robert Ford was also, I guess, involved in that rebranding or image revamp of this Julani character. So do not underestimate the British, okay?
No, I don't.
They're the best at this stuff. And this is a long program. We're talking 30, 40, 50 years. It doesn't matter. They put their stakes down, and they camp, and they'll go for decades until they get what they want. And in this case, it was what Israel wants, was to change the regime in Syria, and the Iranians are completely vindicated now, by the way, by their reason for intervening in Syria. It was for their own self-interest, first and foremost. And look what happened. Syria became a runway for an attack on Iran. The Iranians were right all along. So they had a right to be there. They had a right to help this government in Damascus prevent them from being toppled by foreign terrorist hordes. They had a right to do that for their own national security, literally, because that's exactly what happened? The government fell, and then the attack came. In just a
Yes.
few months, it was there. Israel attacked Iran, and through that corridor, right through Syria, right over Iraqi Kurdistan, direct shot straight to Iran. So all of the conspiracy theories, all the Muslim Brotherhood types that were saying, oh, Assad this, Assad didn't do this, oh, he's kowtowing to the Israelis, he's whatever, discriminating against the Sunnis, he is persecuting the Syrians, he's the butcher of Damascus, all BS, all propaganda, all of it. And it was all for this. It was all for this. So from that point, Kevork, we can say that the Muslim Brotherhood are an absolute tool for Israel.
Yes.
Because they really helped to achieve that major strategic objective, which was regime change in Syria for a path to attack Iran. It just happened in front of us. Is anybody still denying that that's the case at this point? I would love to know.
I think nobody is denying that is the case, but there are so many people having lots of questions about Iran's passive stance on the Muslim Brotherhood in some cases, and which is suicidal for themselves, I believe, and they have shot themselves in the feet multiple times. For example, they tried to open up with Mohammed Morsi and other Muslim Brotherhood groups. The main reason why I'm not arguing that the Arab Spring was all manufactured, but I'm arguing that there were serious forces in the Democratic Party and Qatar. They have tried to shape the outcome of the Arab Spring to bring the Muslim Brotherhood to Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Syria, and by doing so, they would create a long belt of countries starting from Turkey, Syria. Lebanon would be swallowed very quickly. Israel would be their ally, Egypt, Tunisia, and Libya. They would have completely isolated Iran from the region, which failed in Syria because of the intervention, of course, of Iran, Hezbollah, Russia, and the Syrian army. But later, they have all failed again, and this regime change war restarted, and they have toppled Assad. And this is, guys, a screenshot of an email sent by Jake Sullivan in February 2012 to her boss back then, Hillary Clinton, basically saying, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. This was 13 years ago. Then we have in this article, guys, we have
But just quickly, Kevork, going back to that email. So that email followed a conversation between Jake Sullivan and Jonathan Powell. That's my understanding of that. So
yes.
Because Powell had been grooming Julani. Or his organization, or the British, or whoever, whatever consultancy firm or whatever. So British intelligence, I'm not sure of the details, but that's the progression of events, and it ended in what you have on screen there.
Yep. So this is, guys, from February, the 12th of February 2012, right? And then we have this article on the front line, and this is by PBS. And this is the first time an American journalist met with Julani, and this was in 2021. This is when they started rebranding Julani, polishing his face, and trying to trim his beard in order to present him as an alternative for Assad. And if you search for an asset here, so if you see James Jeffrey, guys, James Jeffrey has been the U.S. Special Envoy under both Republican and Democratic administrations, and he told the PBS here, as you can see, Julani's organization was an asset to America's strategy in Idlib. This is in 2021, like 3 years before the regime change happened. They were telling us, like with a straight face, that Julani has been an asset and still is an asset. But Patrick, the only thing Julani had to do is to say, I will normalize ties with Israel, and I will concede the Golan Heights and Mount Hermon. Like, it is mind-boggling for me that the UK, the US, Germany, France, all over these Western countries, they would change their position once even a notorious, very, I would say, well-established terrorist, which everybody knows him, would just concede to Israel, territories to Israel. Why is this so important for all these countries that Israel comes first, even before their own interests?
I think that's why there were the terrorist designations being expunged, because Julani's made the overtures for normalization with Israel. They're even talking about a land swap, with Tripoli in northern Lebanon and the northern Bekaa in exchange for allowing Israel to hold on to the Golan Heights. I mean, this is just insidious. Immediately, the American embassy in Lebanon should come out and make a statement saying that's unacceptable, but they're not. They're just quiet on it. So that means something very evil is going on right now in the region. The United States is behind it, and Israel's behind it, and this stooge they've got in Damascus, and that's all he is a stooge. He's only allowed to be in power because they need a strong man to at least occupy the center of Syria for now. But when the time comes, he's finished. He's out.
Yes.
Whenever that is. So he's a placeholder, as it were. And of course, the Gulf are really happy because they have an extremist Salafi purist, borderline Wahhabi Sunni in power, and that sort of, they think, we can. That's a foundation we can build on in Syria. So they're happy about that, but it's really a disaster on so many levels for Syria. They're trying to sell it like this is some kind of, great reformist revolution. This guy is running pogroms. The foreign secretary from Britain standing there after pogroms against Alawites, Christians, Yazidis, Ismailis, Druze. All of these groups were protected under Assad.
Yes.
You had a secular government in Syria. There was no discrimination based on religion or ethnicity. It didn't happen in Syria. But now that's the norm, and they're just glossing it over. They're papering over these heinous crimes. Women being abducted, ending up on the human traffic to Idlib on the bridal street market. It's disgusting. How could the British or the Americans accept that kind of, summary executions on the street? Just sending the thugs into
every day.
It's horrific. If compared to what Syria was before, that would never happen.
Julani killed 1,500 civilians in 3 days, 72 hours. 72 hours, yeah, I think 72 hours. I think.
And no election. He said, "Oh no, we're not going to have any elections." So he's running pogroms. He's said no elections. I mean, and they're saying, "Oh, this is a great potential for Syria. Let's lift sanctions. Let's open diplomatic relations with this guy." It makes a mockery of everything. But you know what, Kevork? This is the final culmination of 14-year, 20 or more years, a regime change operation. And this is what they're left with. Literally pawn life in Damascus. And they're pumping it up like this is some kind of a regal, return of the king, as it were. It's just unbelievably ridiculous.
Indeed. Kevork asking Kevork, how is it possible for a transitional government to make decisions as big as normalization, peace treaties, and border demarcation? My short answer would be because they can, because they were brought to power for this. That's why Julani said the elections are sometime in the future, inshallah, Habibi. So he abolished the parliament, the People's Assembly, he abolished the cabinet, he abolished the judiciary or the constitutional court, which means he is the God now. He is not responsible in front of anyone. Therefore, he can do anything he wants because that's why he came. There is something important, guys. I have been trying to deliver this to you in different ways. In October 2024, when the Jordanian foreign minister, Ayman Safadi, was in Damascus and asked Assad to do a U-turn on the moderate Arab camp after the assassination of Nasrallah, and he said no to that American demand, that's when they have agreed to bring Julani to power. All these powers, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Israel, US, UK, they have agreed to bring Julani to power after they talked to him about this normalization. The deal to normalize ties with Israel and open an embassy, give up on the Golan and Mount Hermon, has been agreed before the regime change, before he even came to power. Otherwise, they wouldn't have supported his takeover of the country. This was the moment they have all agreed on this, that they will give him legitimacy and power to continue ruling Syria for as long as he can, of course, as long as he's achieving these very important strategic, let's say, goals of the US and Israel in the region. And they have been successful, unfortunately, for the Syrian people. Guys, as we were discussing, I will just screen this. This is the QR code of Patrick's Substack, just to make it easier for you. If you're watching this on a mobile or on a, let's say, on a laptop, PC, you can just scan this QR code and you could go directly to his Substack. Patrick, today we were talking about the U.S. Special Envoy to the region, especially Tom Barak. He's now in Beirut, and he's urging the Lebanese government to disarm Hezbollah so they could change the maps, basically. They want to give Tripoli to Syria, and so that Israel can take the Golan Heights. But this looks like a Sykes-Picot again, all over again, but it is more based on ethnic and religious lines. And I believe this is a formula for endless wars in the region. If anyone believes that there is a Sunni state, and then there is a Shia state, or an Alawite state, or a Druze state, that they will somehow coexist together with different mini-states, which they cannot survive and bring the basic necessities for their own people, because Syria's economy is built in a very complicated way, that the oil is in the east and the wheat is the north, and the businesses are in Damascus, the industries in Aleppo. So everybody needs everybody. So if you create these mini states, I believe for economic reasons, for ethnic reasons, for religious reasons, these mini states, they will fight against each other. So America is creating conditions now in the region for endless wars, for instability, basically, in Syria and in the region. I don't think that's the...
Lebanon can afford to give up any territory. It's already a tiny country. So Tom Barak, I think his original position was ambassador to Turkey under Trump. So he is an old hand in the Middle East from a business point of view. He's actually probably the smartest guy in Trump's cabinet, truth be known. But he's on a basically a mission that's a failed mission, but a very dodgy mission that he is on. And you know what? There's no way Lebanon, and by the way, I think that there is an Alawite population in Tripoli in northern Lebanon. It's not huge, but it's significant enough. I just don't see, I see this as basically a dog whistle to the sectarian elements. They're trying to stir up a sectarian war in Lebanon. And the way to do it is to put pressure on, maximum pressure, economic pressure, political pressure, maybe physical violence pressure. And, the Lebanese are like, well, there's a section of the Lebanese population will be like, oh, this can't go on anymore. We should just, deal with the problem. And they'll just kind of submit. There's a Christian faction in Lebanon that would very happily ally with Israel, with the Zionists. And because they would be allying with America at the same time, so they want to cozy up to that sort of power base. But this is it's not going to happen. Hezbollah is just too powerful and too numerous, and the demographics have changed in Lebanon over the years. If you look at the confessionalist parliamentary divisions, how the parliament's divided up, it's based on demographics really from the 1960s.
Yes, that's why it's not allowed to do new statistics in Lebanon.
Yeah, if they did, things would change. Mm-hmm. Things would change.
Shias will be the majority in the parliament in Lebanon if they do it. So that's why they don't.
Yeah. I think your volume's down a little bit, Kevork. I think.
I will check again.
Yeah.
I think something here. It should be better. So I received an email from YouTube.
Oh, really?
I will show you what I posted. This is what I posted. Just like I posted on X, I posted this one. And I said, Palestine Action is a terrorist organization and Al-Qaeda is a reformed organization, a rules-based international order, which is clearly, I'm being sarcastic.
Yeah.
And this post, guys, they consider it glorification of terrorism. So they say, we have reviewed your appeal for the following post. We reviewed your content carefully, Patrick. They did it carefully, huh? And have confirmed that it violates our violent criminal organization's policy. We know this is probably disappointing news, but it is our job to make sure that YouTube is safe place for all. So the strike will stay for 39 more days now.
Safe for satire. Yeah, safe for satire. Yeah. Defending the people against satire.
It's unbelievable, but this comes at the time now that Trump delisted them from the terrorist organization, so they should follow maybe their boss now in the U.S. Even if I was serious, right?
Yeah, Daddy has delisted them, so they should listen to Daddy. Daddy took them off the list.
Do you know who will stay silent on this case? All these Trump MAGA base who are aggressively supporting Trump and defending him all the time, the big talking heads in the United States saying America has fallen. They have they could have a Muslim mayor in New York City.
Yeah.
They compare it to 9/11, and now their president has delisted Al-Qaeda from the terrorist list.
No, they're in meltdown. They're all in meltdown because Mamdani is eating with his hands, the scooping up the rice in the curry with his hands, and they're freaking out. But delisting Al-Qaeda from the terrorists, that's fine. That's perfectly fine. And that's because it's Abu Donald. It's Abu Donald. He's always been Abu Donald. He's always been. He saved Julani back in 2018. Donald Trump saved Julani, stopped the counteroffensive that was being mounted by the Tiger forces, the SAA, the Russians, Hezbollah, the Iranians. He intervened, and then Erdogan stabbed Damascus in the back because he said, "Oh, I'm going to help you deal with the terrorist problem in Idlib," and of course, nothing of the sort. And that was the end of that.
What the naivete, Patrick, how many times the Russians, Iranians, and Syrians should be basically stabbed in the back, that they use these negotiations for buying time and preparing for an offensive like they did in Ukraine, Minsk 1, Minsk 2, and like they were talking to Iran and they struck them. Syria is the same.
Soleimani, before the assassination of Soleimani, every time. Don't negotiate with the West or Israel. They're doing it now in Gaza. Steve Witkoff. Oh, we're really excited about a possible ceasefire. Give me a break.
And then 150 people get killed in one day, like collecting food. That is what I say. These agreements to freeze the conflict in Syria, it brought demoralization among the Syrian people. It brought economic impoverishment. It just broke the country from within. It killed the soul. So then everything was very rotten. So Julani walked between Aleppo and Damascus. He didn't even fight any war. Yeah. They just rolled into Damascus.
With sanctions in the end and currency warfare, and it took its toll. Plus, let's just put this to bed. When you hear MAGA people say, Donald Trump didn't start any new wars in his first term. No, that's a lie. He occupied Syria in his first term. Yes. And that created conditions, along with the double pincer of EU and American sanctions embargo on Syria, to break the Syrian economy and society, and to defend the jihadists, and then the U.S. working with the SDF to make sure Syria doesn't have access to its oil, to its agricultural bounty, to its water and hydroelectric assets as well. Yes. All of these things were denied from Syria while they were under sanctions. It's a miracle that the Assad government, that society survived as long as it did. It is a miracle under all of that various pressure. So that was Trump. Trump 1.0 did that.
Indeed. Guys, I will just finally thank our friend who changed his name, the moderator of this live chat, Red Access, for moderating the chat, which is, he's really dedicating time and effort. So really, I'm thankful for you, my friend, and all the followers should be thankful for you, because organizing the live chat is important, especially when some people come and just post emojis or try to, curse and fight and do all these things. We're trying to create an environment for everyone to discuss and have a conversation. There's so many people come to this channel, disagree with me personally or could disagree with Patrick, and that's totally fine. We really like that. We only dislike the people who come and like you, literally spitting to your face, and then I read in the comments people just fighting each other, and we can't really have a conversation. This channel is about education, so we can have a respectful conversation together. So thank you so much, Patrick, again, for dedicating your valuable time and coming to our show and discussing this really important case, which is like people start talking about Gaza from October 7. The same thing with all this is happening in now in Syria or elsewhere. People don't go back in history and try to dig in what happened back then, which led into repercussions, consequences, blowbacks. So we are here covering this case. Thank you so much, Patrick.
My pleasure. Thank you, Kevork.
And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to today's stream. I really appreciate all of you, whether you're watching this on YouTube, on Rumble, on Ganjing World. If you want to help this channel to beat the suppression that we just got this strike from YouTube, please thumbs up, hit the like button, subscribe to this YouTube channel, maybe leave a comment. And if you like to support the independent work I'm doing, there are different means in the description below. And I will see you tomorrow. Peace be upon you, upon your families. Salam.